My name's Dan, and on the weekend I ran my first ever marathon, so here are the biggest lessons that I learned along the way. So a bit of context, I've been running fairly consistently for the last 16 months. Back in April of this year, I was meant to run my first marathon in Manchester, but I picked up a knee injury about 2 weeks out and had to drop out. And since then, if I'm being completely honest, I have struggled to find that level of consistency again with my training. Anyway, about 5 weeks ago, an opportunity came up to run the New York City Marathon with Sports Direct and New Balance. So naturally, even though I wasn't in the best shape of my life, I was obviously going to say yes to that because that is bucket list stuff. I knew deep down I'd be able to get round. It just wasn't going to be quick and it was not going to be pretty, which leads me on nicely to lesson number 1. Never underestimate the marathon distance. Now this was probably the biggest mistake I made, right? So basically the way I wanted to approach the run was split it into different segments. So we have a 2k warm up and we follow that with 4 10-kilometer runs, and that equals 42 kilometers, aka the marathon distance. I can run a 10-kilometer with relative ease in about 60 minutes. So whilst I wasn't actually racing in New York, I figured I would come in around there or thereabouts the 4-hour mark. However, the problem with that train of thought is not all 10 kilometers are created equally. And the last 10k of that race was infinitely more difficult than I could have imagined. And when we dive into the 10-kilometer splits from the day, this paints a very accurate depiction of the race and how it went. So the first 10 kilometers we came in 55 minutes. That was the quickest 10 kilometers of the day, which is never what you want to see. But obviously at that point, my adrenaline is pumping, the crowds are insane, and my legs are feeling fresh. So that was always going to happen. The second 10 kilometers we came in just under the hour mark. This is more or less my easy pace and the pace I thought I would be able to withhold throughout the race. But as you can see, that third 10 kilometers, the wheels had started to come off. 1 hour and 8 minutes, my legs were starting to ache, the cramp was oncoming, and we started to enter the trenches a little bit at this point. And then that final 10 kilometers, I just completely capitulated. 1 hour and 17 minutes to finish that final 10k. It literally felt like it was never going to end. And by the sort of 35 kilometer mark, I'd reached a point where I was crumbling mentally as well, not just physically, because I felt so close to the end of the race, but I was just going nowhere. I thought the finish line was just never going to come. So obviously make sure you're prepared physically, but also prepare yourself mentally for that final 10 kilometers because it is such a slog and it's going to be harder than you think it is. Lesson number 2, stick to your nutrition plan on the day. So going into the run, I had a fairly solid idea as to what I was going to do nutrition wise. I had 6 gels that I was going to take every 40 minutes or so, and I was going to rely mainly on the aid stations at the marathon to get my liquids, because in New York they had aid stations every mile or two. It was mint. Carb loaded for days in advance. I'd taken on bare electrolytes, so I went into the day knowing what I was going to be doing, and I didn't stick to it at all. Well, I tell a lie. For the first half of the race, when everything was going well and I was feeling good, I stuck to the nutrition plan pretty perfectly. But during that second half, especially when things started to get bad, I was just desperate. I was chugging Gatorade at every aid station. I was taking sweets off spectators, just hoping that something was going to make me feel a bit better. At one point around mile 22, one of the spectators was handing out like half a banana. I despise bananas, but I took that thing and chowed down on it like it was a fine delicacy. I was so desperate for something to make me feel better. But obviously taking on all that excess food, all that excess liquid in your belly whilst you're running did not do me well at all. I ended up with a monster stitch at mile 23 that I thought could have been like an oncoming heart attack. I was genuinely concerned that I was just going to keel over. Trust me, a stitch is the last thing you need when you are deep in the trenches at mile 23. So don't do it. Stick to your nutrition plan and don't take shit off strangers unless you're desperate. Lesson number 3. Now this is something I did that I was actually happy with. This was run for fun, not for a time. Now obviously this is going to be totally dependent on your goals and aspirations for the race, but for me, with it being my first ever marathon, the fact it was in New York, which is the biggest race in the world, and the fact I hadn't had a chance to properly train, there was no chance I was going to run for a time. I was going to be there just for the vibes and to take it all in, and this was definitely the move for me. Not once did I find myself stressed out about my pace, looking at my watch. I was able to take in the crowds, the views, every single thing about the event, and it just made it more enjoyable because I was simply running for fun. And I noticed it also meant that ahead of the race I had virtually no pre-race nerves whatsoever, because I think a lot of the nerves or the anxiety that you get ahead of a race normally is based on the fact you've put a lot of pressure on yourself to hit a certain time, whereas without that stress I was just chilling until the start line. Then I obviously got a bit nervous, but I would definitely recommend at least trying running an event just for fun rather than a time. It just adds an extra layer of fun to it and takes a bit of the pressure off. Lesson number 4 is more of a logistical, practical lesson, but if you have people coming to watch you, arrange a meet point afterwards so you can find them easily. I had my mum and dad and my girlfriend come and watch me, and finding them afterwards in New York was an absolute shambles. They didn't know where I finished, I didn't know where where they were. I couldn't speak to them on the phone because the signal was crap because there was 50,000 people dispersed around the streets of New York. So after I'd finished, I ended up having to walk another 2 kilometers just to find them because of the way all the roads were shut down. They couldn't find me, yada yada yada. It was a nightmare. So ahead of running, just arrange a meet point with people so you can meet them afterwards easily, because you don't want to have to be trekking about when you have nothing left in your legs. So in a nutshell, they are some of the key lessons that I learned throughout the experience. I hope I've not made it sound too bad, because it was without a doubt one of the best experiences of my life. And the sense of achievement after crossing the finish line after going through such a tough couple of hours was mega. So much so that I am going to be doing another marathon this side of the calendar. Can't say too much about it at the minute, but it's in Spain, so Google it. And I should be able to take a lot of the learnings that I've had from New York into this race and have another belter, so we'll see how we get on. I don't know how you're meant to end this YouTube stuff. I come from TikTok, so I'll just say thanks for watching and see you next time.